Hi everyone, my name is Shipra and I'm a remote design thinking coach. I'm here to share with you some things I've learned from facilitating over 100 of these remote design workshops. When I talk about a facilitator, I'm really talking about a coach. This is a person that is not actually playing the game or doing the work themselves. They're really responsible for the entire team's success and really responsible for guiding the team to be able to meet their goals. So when I facilitate, I am generally not a participant, I'm only the facilitator. And here are the values that I live by when I facilitate. I'm really aiming to be inclusive. And by this, I mean inclusive to people who are remote, to folks who might be slightly more introverted, to folks who might perceive themselves as a little bit more junior and might be less likely to speak up in a room where he might consider other people to be more senior. Inclusive to minorities as well, of course. Valuing time is another construct. I think it's really kind of hard to be in a workshop that's not structured or a meeting that's not structured. You feel like you're wasting your time. So, really, every workshop I run, I want to make sure the participants feel their time is being valued and being utilized in a constructive fashion. And finally, I really aim to find conclusion. I think you can have really great workshops that end with no conclusion. And I've been part of workshops where after 2 days, the participants leave feeling like that was amazing, that was so fun and so great. But they just go back to their desks and it's business as usual. For me, a successful design workshop is one where you find conclusion, restate goals, and really build something that's going to drive your future work in a different direction, perhaps, than it might have been before the workshop. As I talk through some of my tips and tricks, I'll come back to inclusivity, time, and conclusion. Uh, Before we jump into tricks, the first thing to understand is what it means to be remote. I think a lot of times when I talk about my work, people assume like I'm working with these super cool digital nomads that are living in just really awesome beach towns in Bali and logging in and working. But that's not usually what I see. Here are the four different types of teams I end up working with. And they're along a 4x4, 2x2 that shows clumpiness on one side. Clumpiness meaning how likely is a team member to sit with another team member in person in an office, and the equality of distribution along sort of the bottom axis or the horizontal axis represents how equally distributed the team is. A really common scenario I see is up here on the top right, which is high clumpiness and very lopsided distribution. So this might be a really big headquarters somewhere, perhaps in San Francisco or in Atlanta. And then there are these little like people working from home, sort of one-off team members that either used to be at the head office and decided to move, or were just, hired uh, imagining that they would be really effective working from home. A lot of times what happens in these types of teams is that it is so much easier to have a conversation with someone in the office that folks who are not present physically tend to be left out of the more strategic discussions, but they are fairly valued in terms of execution. So on the top left is also high clumpiness, but a little bit more of an equality of distribution. So this is when a company might have three different offices, or a team might be split pretty equally between three different offices. These situations tend to be a little bit easier for remote collaboration. It means already that team members in each office probably are used to the idea of collaborating deeply with someone that's not in the same office. Um, but still, I think what might, I think the downside of this kind of arrangement is people create subcultures within each office setting, and it might be harder then to bridge those subcultures and really reach out and think together or ideate together. At the bottom right is this sort of lower clumpiness, but a more lopsided distribution. So you might have some people in the office, in small offices, perhaps at a WeWork location somewhere, and then a bunch of people sort of working from home or home offices or individual WeWork spots. This type of team tends to be kind of smaller, and they tend to be a little bit more open to remote collaboration. They're a little bit more used to sort of always being on Zoom or always writing things down in a Google Doc or an online wiki. So yeah, but I think it still kind of has some um, remnants of people within the same office tending to like want to stick to each other or uh, collaborate with each other a little bit more. And then you have sort of the frogs or the fully remote orgs. And these are completely distributed teams like Basecamp or Envision or Zapier. So there's a bunch of case studies written on them. But this is where each individual employee is working in a geographical location that's separate from other employees. Um, these teams tend to be really the most inclusive, equal, and used to remote collaboration. They're likely the best teams to be attempting to run design studios with in a remote setting. When I'm working with a team, I'm trying to figure out where they fall into these spectrums, and I'm trying to get them to some level of equality of distribution first. And so if someone has like a big office, I might try and see if they'll book like 2 or 3 different conference rooms, and see if I can achieve some level of smaller clumps. Um, and really, when ideally what I'm trying to achieve is like some kind of a fully remote distributed team. This might be asking people to work from home for the 2 days that we're running the workshop, and it might be just asking people to sit in different conference rooms, even if they feel like they have to come into the office or they don't have a space at home to work from. And that's really to start kind of making it so that we can be truly inclusive and that we don't fall back on kind of just talking to the person that's next to us physically. With remote workshops, structure is extremely important. I would argue structure is important even with in-person workshops, but sometimes, when you're in a room together with a whiteboard, you can kind of like stumble your way through and still come out with something interesting at the other end. With a remote workshop, unless you have a strong structure, it can just be very disengaging for participants. So here's an example of how I might structure a workshop. Let's assume that a product leader came to me and asked me to get the team together and that we need to create a strawman roadmap for Q1, right? And so the thing I might do is send out an agenda like this to the team in a calendar invite. I might say, hey, well, we're going to do 2 days. Day 1 is going to be retrospective and problem framing. Day 2 is going to be ideation and prioritization. On the back end, though, I create my agenda. And my agenda is really thinking through every 10 minutes, what are we going to be doing as a team? What am I going to be asking people to do? And what are we going to be taking away? So it's really, really structured. For instance, for the Q4 retrospective, which was 2 hours, I might break that down to I need to assign homework with certain topics for people to reflect on or gather data on and bring to the meeting. And then there may be readouts where we go around 5 minutes each, time boxed, um, play Oscar-style music at the end of 5 minutes to make sure people move on. And then we might do an activity where individually we've listened to everything and we write down what we should start doing, stop doing, continue doing. Very typical retrospective activity. And then we might come back and create an affinity to see what the themes are in terms of start, stop, and continue. And then we might have another discussion where each individual reflects on one or two things that really resonated with them from the readouts. And then we might have a dot voting or some kind of voting activity to go from like a ton of retrospective notes to 2 or 3 things that we should start, stop, and continue doing. And then I might have a note here for myself to say, hey, I'm going to ask the decider, who is like an identified person at the beginning of the workshop, I'm going to ask the decider to write the final conclusion in terms of what are we really going to change next. So as you can see, like my agenda is extremely detailed, and this helps me make sure like that things are moving along. Once I create an agenda, I usually translate that into a Miro board using templates, activity guides. Perhaps I may have like a little, Mad Lib style template for people to fill out. This is a bullseye sort of prioritization framework that I might want to be using. Any data that I want them to refer to. So this is really a visual agenda for teams to know what we're going to do for the next day or two. So along with this, I want to talk about tools. Of course, the tools in a remote workshop are different from the tools you might bring to an in-person workshop. When I do in-person workshops, I bring Sharpies, stickies, these giant Post-it notepads, which are extremely useful for offices with few whiteboards, and a timer, a physical timer. And I'm looking for a space with a lot of walls, right? A lot of wall space is extremely required and useful for a physical workshop. In a remote setting, though, I can't bring a lot of these things to the meeting. I will bring either some sort of a Google Doc or Google Slides that we might collaborate on, set up a Zoom conference, create a Slack channel perhaps for this workshop where we can share offline things or links. A Miro board is generally like kind of the where we spend 80% of our time actually doing the work. However, I also ask people to prepare their own workstations to be really effective during the workshop. So I ask them to have Sharpies and paper. I still really believe in the power of sketching and the physicality of design workshops. And so I ask them to have Sharpies, not ballpoint pens, because I'm going to ask them to take pictures and upload it. It has to be Sharpies and blank paper with them. And then also a phone so they can take pictures and upload it onto either the Miro board or Google Docs. Usually it's the Miro board. I also ask them to have headphones and a mic, just to minimize any technical issues during the meeting. I also prefer that participants have 2 screens, so they can have all the faces on one screen, all the people in the meeting who they can see, and then the Miro board or Google Docs or whatever we're using for our work on the other screen. Sometimes when people don't have 2 screens at their home offices, they can use their cell phones to have all of the video streams from all the faces onto the side. And because I can't bring snacks, I also ask them to keep snacks around. It depends on sort of where you are time zone wise and how the workshop is set up, but it's really useful for people to just have something around on their desk that they can munch on in case they need to during the workshop. So yeah, a little bit more of a setup cost. And then finally, I want to talk about engagement. And this goes back to kind of valuing time and also being inclusive. If we create a structure or a place during our workshop where everyone feels like they have something to contribute, I think people are going to be engaged. People are disengaged when there are conversations where they feel like either no one's listening to them or that they have nothing to say on this topic. So when I'm running a workshop, I'm really trying to avoid situations where there's just two people talking over each other and everybody else is just like on Slack or email. One really technique to ensure that everyone's engaged is to give each person work, right? Each person should be responsible for doing something at every point when the workshop is going on, right? So one kind of formula that I use a lot for any sort of ideation activity or any sort of generative activity where we're creating ideas or concepts or themes or whatever is to sketch alone. So there might be 5 minutes to sketch alone or write down what we should start, stop, and continue doing alone, or write down user problems alone. So we may have 5 minutes and there's a timer on Miro that you can start and everybody can see it. And then we come back together and critique in pairs. And Zoom has these amazing breakout rooms, which are extremely useful as a facilitator. You can like put people into different sort of breakout rooms. You can jump in and out of rooms. And then when you're ready, you can pull everyone back from the breakout rooms to the main circle. So it really is a great sort of facilitator tool to do breakouts. And then you might come back and then share in a circle. And the best part about this formula is a lot of times by the time people are sharing their thoughts, basically they haven't had time to reflect. And when other people are sharing what they think, you tend to be thinking about what am I going to say, what am I going to say when it's my turn. With this kind of formula, you've already kind of figured out what you're going to say. And so in a circle, you can hopefully be present and listen to others. At the end of the circle, we're probably going to prioritize or vote. And so each participant needs to really be taking in what's going on in order to be able to then help us converge or vote. So that's one kind of formula. Like I said, Zoom and breakout rooms is extremely, extremely valuable. I think breakouts of 2 is so much better than breakouts of 3 or 4, because when there's 2 people, one person is either presenting or expected to give feedback, and there's no one else to fall back on if you're not present, you're not speaking. So breakout groups of 2, I think, are kind of my favorite sort of size for discussions in a remote setting. Also, music is an important part of my workshops. When we're together in a room and you have people sort of writing on sticky notes or drawing or sketching, you can sort of kind of look up and see everybody else sketching around you, and there's a little bit more of that feeling of you're in a room with people who are doing the same thing. When you're at home or in your home office and there's like you're sketching for 5 minutes, there's this awkward silence on the remote video conference. And so music sort of, I have a Spotify playlist that I use for these settings, and music just kind of creates a kind of a cohesive virtual place that everyone is in. You know, everyone's listening to the same music as they're sketching, and so you feel like you're in this room with people, even though you're at home. So music, I found, is really, really helpful to keep people engaged and keep people like productive during those heads down times. And finally, stretching. Like I said, I really believe in sort of the right brain creative activities, which come from our bodies, not our minds, usually. So stretching or just taking a break and acknowledging that our bodies have been sitting in a certain position is super helpful. And I think when we're physically together, we're triggered to take these breaks, these physical breaks. When we're remote, we may not be triggered to take them as much. So I'll put them in my agenda for myself just to remind me to be like, okay, let's take a moment to breathe. Let's do a 5 minute meditation. Let's stretch. Let's just regroup, recenter, and then move forward. So yeah, stretching and music, they sound kind of flighty, but really important to keep people sort of going and engaged. This is just the tip of the iceberg. I have a bunch of information on Medium, or you can tweet me at skayan and hopefully continue the conversation there. Thank you, Miro User Groups, for having me talk with you today.